Hey guys, it's Mrs. Rast here, and we are getting back into learning more about China. Actually, we're going to be going a little bit further out of ancient times and more into a modern time period, and our title today is China Reunifies. When we last left off with ancient China, we had done 4 dynasties: the Shang, the Zhou, the Qin, and the Han. Well, after the Han dynasty, they actually collapse and go through the dynastic cycle, which we have talked about at this point. And now we are going to be looking at 3 other dynasties, and they are the Sui, the Tang, and the Song. And each dynasty will go through that dynastic cycle of coming to power, and then things go well, and then things don't go so well, and they get overthrown, and so on and so on. A couple reminders: make sure that you are on the correct pages for taking notes, so go back to Edmodo to check it, or go back to your agenda if you wrote it down there. Anything in red needs to be written down, and if you need to stop, rewind, fast forward, watch it again, that is perfectly okay. They're your notes. So right now, please take a moment to write down your title and your big idea, and then we'll be ready to get going. Okay, so we just ended with the Han Dynasty. Eventually they lose power in around 220 AD, and we enter into a time period lasting over 350 years called the Period of Disunion. At this time we have a couple of different things going on. One, we have a period of chaos where people are falling apart with disorder. There's not really a structure. There's not a ruling power that is over everyone. It's kind of a mismatch. It's a little crazy. But there's also some peaceful developments that we want to be aware of. For one thing, there are people coming in from the north called nomads. Nomads are people who move from place to place. These nomadic people eventually end up settling into northern China. And the people that are already living in northern China begin to adopt or accept the nomad culture. And the people coming in begin to accept and adopt some of the Chinese practices. So, for example, we now have the nomadic people using Chinese names and speaking Chinese and dressing like Chinese, and so we have a cultural blending. The same thing takes place in southern China. Some of the northern Chinese had fled when the nomads came in and took over. They went to southern China. And so the people coming from the north of China into the south of China, well, they are doing a mixing of cultures as well. So we see new types of art and music developing, new foods and clothing are becoming popular, and this huge cultural spread spreads over a huge, wide geographic area, and more people become and learn about the culture of the Chinese. Finally, in about 589, we are going to see China become reunified, and for about 700 years they're going to be unified under a series of dynasties, and those are the 3 we're going to talk about today. The first dynasty is called the Sui dynasty. It lasts for about 20 years. The first ruler of the Sui dynasty is actually a Zhou general, and his name is Yang Jian. He becomes a ruler of the north and then quickly conquers the south and unifies China and creates his own dynasty. Like I said, it doesn't last long, but he does do some things for China, which include rebuilding parts of the Great Wall. He had a tolerance for different types of religious beliefs. And he also began the Grand Canal, which was a canal linking northern and southern China, which you can see a picture over off to the side. This would allow for transportation and for goods to move from place to place. From the Sui dynasty, we go into 618 AD, where a former Sui official overthrows the old government. The dynasty that he sets up is known as the Tang, and it would rule for about 300 years. Under the Tang dynasty, China begins to expand. It expands to the east. It also expands more into large parts of Central Asia. The Tang dynasty is considered to be the golden age of Chinese civilization. One of its famous rulers was a emperor by the name of Taizong. Some of the things he did included conquering lands, reforming the military, expanding networks of trade routes and canals, and creating law code. Another ruler that we look at during the Tang Dynasty is a ruler by the name of Shu Enzong. During his time, culture flourishes under his rule. So some of China's finest poets ruled while he was in charge. We also have during the Tang Dynasty the only woman to ever rule China. Her name was Empress Wu. She was originally married to a sickly emperor and ruled for him until he passed away. When he died, Wu decided her sons were not worthy of ruling, and she kept the power for herself. She did rule with an iron fist. She threatened death to anyone who tried to take away her power. But she did do some good things. She brought stability and prosperity to China, and she chose advisors based on their abilities rather than on their ranks, and that was a rather new idea at that time. When the Tang falls, China goes into another time period of chaos. They have separate kingdoms. People are competing for power. There's no unification at all. This is known as the 5 Dynasty and 10 Kingdom period. Once this time period ends, they are going to be unified and reunited as an entire kingdom under the Song Dynasty. And also like the Tang, the Song Dynasty is going to be a time of great accomplishments for the Chinese people. Okay, so when we have the Song Dynasty, that runs from about 960 to 1279 AD. Like I said a moment ago, it was a time of accomplishments. And right now we really take a look at the idea of Buddhism. And we know that Buddhism originally began in India, and it first came to China during the Han Dynasty. However, during that time period, there were only a few practicing Buddhists. That begins to change during that last time of chaos that we were looking at. During the troubled time, many people in China turned to Buddhism. They took comfort in the Buddhism teachings with the idea that people can escape suffering and achieve a state of peace that we know as nirvana. So by the time the period of disunion ends, Buddhism becomes well established. Wealthy people are donating land and money in order to build temples. And we also see that Buddhism begins to send out missionaries to travel east. And so Buddhism is now going to be introduced to people in Japan, Korea, and other Asian lands. Buddhism also influences art and literature. We know it influenced architecture in regards to temples. And so it's so important that at this time it's actually called the Age of Buddhism. And that goes from about 400 AD to 845 AD. The Golden Age of Buddhism does come to an end when a Tang emperor attacks the religion. He does his best to destroy it. He burns books. He takes away the land from the Buddhist temples. He destroys the temples. And so it does weaken the influence of Buddhism, but it does not destroy it completely. Buddhism continues to shape Chinese art and literature, but it does also begin to change. We see now a blending of Buddhism with elements of Confucianism and Taoism, which will, in the end, create a new way of thinking. Okay, so that is it for your notes. Take a moment to draw a line under what you've written down, review what you've written down, and write a 2 to 3 sentence summary over what your notes have covered, and I will see you tomorrow in class.